For the first time in 1,000 years, the Clone Wars saw the Republic rearmed with a new and powerful navy defending the galaxy's planets from the emerging separatist menace. However, as the Clone Wars ended and active threats to the galaxy disappeared, the new Empire did not downsize their military, as many expected. Rather, they continued to militarize, expanding in particular the Imperial Star Fleet. Internally, this was largely due to the increased military assets needed to maintain a police state and the Tarkin Doctrine. However, other rationales and just straight up fabrications were presented publicly, which in a way was paradoxical. Although the Tarkin Doctrine required the rule through fear, the Empire at times put on a kinder public face, even referring to the Death Star as primarily a mining tool. So we get this interesting quote about the introduction of the Imperial Star Destroyer in the Revenge of the Sith Incredible Cross-Sections book. The Republic Venator was largely responsible for winning the Clone Wars, but after the war, production of the ship was slowed and mostly ended due to the rising presence of the new Imperator, later renamed Imperial line. The Imperial Star Destroyer would serve for decades. The Imperial Star Fleet would justify its existence in the unending war against separatist holdouts, dissident rebels, and even, it is rumored, deterring barbarian invaders from outside the galaxy. The last part here is obviously the most interesting, and we'll get to that in just a second. However, I want to talk about the first two rationales. So, as we discussed earlier, while separatist holdouts were somewhat prevalent, they weren't a galaxy-ending threat, justifying the creation of a gigantic starfleet. In fact, much of the reconquest of the galaxy was actually through older ships, including the 1,000-year-old Invincible class. Obviously, the separatist faction as a whole was manipulated by Palpatine, so much of it disintegrated by the end of the war. So, not an outright lie, but certainly an exaggeration, and the same can be said for rebellion efforts at this point. The Alliance really didn't crystallize until a few years before the Battle of Yavin, and while it was a nuisance, Palpatine himself didn't even take it seriously until after the destruction of the first Death Star. So another case where of course the purpose was legitimate, but the ever-growing scope of the military itself couldn't really be justified. That takes us to the last point, deterring barbarian invaders. Very interesting. Obviously, many take this to be the Yuuzhan Vong, mostly because they were extra-galactic and violent, but I don't think that's what this book is intending. First of all, while Palpatine was aware of the Vong personally, it wasn't something he shared with the galaxy, or even most of his top advisors. Some will argue the counterpoint of, well, he was building the Death Star and other superweapons in order to prepare for their invasion, but I think I've thoroughly debunked this in a prior video, which I'll link above. I think it much more likely that the barbarians being referred to here are either a creation of the Empire, a sort of boogeyman to justify militarization after they had already controlled most of the threats within their galaxy, or perhaps the Toffs. The Toffs were, well, a very barbarian-like species from the satellite galaxy of Fire Fist, which orbited the main Star Wars galaxy. They were large humanoids, incredibly powerful and warlike, and guess what? After the fall of the Empire, they did in fact invade. Listen to these quotes and tell me if you think they fit a barbarian species. The first is from the Unknown Region source book. Their culture is intentionally anachronistic, violently opposed to streamlined functionality. The Toffs have instead embraced elaborate rest and Foppus ritual. Their temperament is crude. Toffs enjoy humor and take pleasure in food and drink. They are hopelessly immersed in their own culture and see no need to understand the ways of other species. After capturing a planet, they topple its monuments and erect grotesque statuary of their own design. Toffs wage war in a way that bored nobles might arrange a hunting expedition, wrecking entire civilizations for the sake of their amusement. They are hedonistic and their temperance is incomprehensible. They gorge themselves to excess with food and drink, sexual conquests, or kills on the sporting ground that others call war. In their ancestral galaxy, the Toffs fought the Nagai, another extragalactic species. The two eventually brought their war to the Star Wars galaxy, which they referred to as Sky River, where the Toffs were eventually defeated. This again was shortly after Endor, so it's not hard to believe that Palpatine was aware of this threat. A threat which he could easily defeat, but which he could use for fear-mongering, especially because the Toffs are just so brutal in the way they subjugate peoples. So, in conclusion, Palpatine really lied about three things in order to justify military expansionism. First, the danger of separatist holdouts. Second, the prevalence of rebel cells. And third, the danger of the extragalactic Toffs. Now, interestingly, all of these do have a grain of truth in them, which is probably why they're so believable for the average citizen of the galaxy, but ultimately they didn't represent threats to even the Republic military, much less the Empire after the Clone Wars. Or at least that's my opinion. Let me know what you think. Was Palpatine talking about some other threat from outside the galaxy? Was he right to militarize the Empire? And do you think people believed the stories he was telling? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. So instead of answering a question of the day today, I have one that I'd like to ask you guys. Some of you might have noticed that I've been running a lot of polls lately on this channel. I would say about 5 a week. And generally I'm letting you guys decide future video topics. Now, some days like today where I'm short on time, I will just do something I've got planned regularly, but although I don't bind myself to them, I found the surveys to be immensely helpful. But I'm wondering, do you find them helpful? Do you like knowing the content that's coming up? And perhaps most annoyingly, do you get annoyed seeing a new poll on your home screen every time you go on YouTube? Please let me know your full thoughts down in the comment section, and you can also send me a tweet on Twitter. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.